Hi everyone, Stephanie LaFaro here. I am back for chapter 6 of John Dewey Experience Education. This chapter is called Meaning of Purpose. I found it kind of very similar in the way it approaches kind of your desires and impulses and critical thinking and reflection that we touched on in chapter 5. But he kind of uses this chapter to expand on his idea of this notion of self-control versus freedom. And he explains how to use your self-control and freedom and how to find that good balance in experiential learning and how to frame your purpose. Because we can't just kind of act on whim all the time. That's not conducive to growth. It doesn't teach us anything. And experiential learning is all about finding your purpose and moving forward. And so he kind of opens with just contrasting again, freedom is not the same as self-control. In fact, he thinks of them as opposites. The facilitator then in experiential learning has to encourage self-control through critical reflection. And if you think of Kolb's learning cycle, there's 4 steps. And that critical reflection is really where learning takes place in experiential learning. And that reflection period is supposed to allow you to reflect on your past experiences, the experience you just had, and go into your next experience better equipped. Okay, so he talks about Plato too, and he brings up a quote from this famous Greek philosopher. A slave executes the purpose of another. And so he reminds us here that you're a slave to yourself and your desires when you act on whim. And the learner in experiential learning, unlike traditional education, which kind of fails to teach learners their purpose, the learner has to participate in forming their own purpose with the facilitator in experiential learning. And so what kind of starts it all? Your desires. I think your adults definitely have that kind of drive to choose education programs that will fit their desires and purposes, but it all starts with an impulse, and then you get a desire. And so what happens in between that impulse and the desire is that how he kind of brings up in chapter 5 that stop and think idea. If you have an impulse, stop and think critically about the consequences of acting on that desire, and then develop a plan to move forward. And so that is kind of how you frame a purpose in a very basic way. There's more on this to come. But having purpose is really like foresight. It's really like an end view, and you need intelligence. You need to use intelligence to see your purpose. And you can use your intelligence after an experience to observe and to recognize objective truths about the situation, different conditions, your circumstances, and that all kind of helps to gain more knowledge about the situation, gain as much knowledge about the situation as you can before you take action. And so it kind of starts with observation. If you're observing things, you can kind of understand the significance of what you're observing. You can form judgment. You can kind of better problem solve if you form best guesses or good, wise judgment. And you can make educated guesses as well if you kind of stop and think critically. And so he gives us 3 steps on how to form a purpose. Number 1 is observation. So you have to see something, you have to experience it. That's observation. It's direct. You're directly experiencing the situation. And then you use knowledge. You can get knowledge from your past experience, your mentors, your facilitators, your peers in the class. And past experience, I think, is the most telling. So observation, you get knowledge, and then thirdly, I don't know why I'm using 2 fingers, is passing judgment. So observation, knowledge, and then passing judgment is how you form a purpose according to John Dewey. And your purpose definitely differs from impulses and basic desires. Purpose is framed through thoughtful planning from your original impulse and desires. And no matter how much you desire for something, you always have to think of the consequences. Otherwise, it's not educational, it's not conducive to your growth or to your learning experience. And again, he kind of reminds us that you think you're free, but really you are a slave to your desires. So stop and think. It's very, very important. You stop and think and you postpone action until critical thinking has occurred. And critical thinking is kind of step 2 and 3 of that 1, 2, 3, observation, knowledge, judgment. Critical thinking is that using knowledge to pass judgment. And your idea of freedom can be really skewed. Going back to chapter 5 too, he kind of warns us that you think you're free, but really you're just a slave to your desires. And a good illustration here is thinking about building a house. You can't build a house without blueprints. If you want to build a house and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna go build it, what's your plan? How do you move forward? Same thing with starting a business. You need a solid business plan. You need a mission statement. You need to meet with investors. There's all these moving parts. Think about how easily your entire life can fall together without a solid plan, especially as adults. And so desire really is human nature. I really love this quote that John Dewey says on page 70 of Experience in Education. He says, "Wishes are empty castles in the air unless they are translated into means by which they can be realized." I'm going to say that one more time. Wishes are empty castles in the air unless they are translated into means by which they can be realized. And so I really like this analogy because you got a big castle in the air and you have your desires and impulses down here. So how do you get up to your castle in the air? Adult education is all about helping you find that ladder so you can climb up and reach your empty castle in the air and fill it with your knowledge so it's not so empty anymore. And that is really what adult education is all about. It's about, especially in John Dewey's book here, he's talking about experiential education. Experiential education is translating those wishes and desires into means and methods for you to get there. Your facilitator and your teacher in adult education aids in that freedom and doesn't restrict it. So they encourage self-control so you can build that ladder up to your castle. He also kind of ends with mentioning that purpose really takes shape through social intelligence. Remember, experiences are social in nature. You're interacting, and that is how you're learning. And so this experiential education needs to be cooperative. It can't be dictated by the facilitator. And your teacher also then has to be aware of each individual's capacities, needs, and experiences, past experiences, to be able to make suggestions to the learner throughout that reflection period. And that suggestion from the facilitator kind of helps the learner to form their purpose. I will end chapter 6 with that. Chapter 7 is a long one, so I will be prepared in about a week or so. Thanks for listening.